Good morning. This is John Richardson speaking with you from Toronto, Canada. Today is Friday, May the 16th, 2025. And my return guest today to talk about a very timely topic is U.S. tax lawyer and renowned FBARologist, Virginia La Torre Jeker, currently in Dubai. Well, Virginia, how are you today?
Hello, John. I'm doing very well, and I hope that you are too, and that all the listeners are doing well.
Well, absolutely. And, I think that we should give ourselves a bit of a hat tip for anticipating the possibility of an American Pope. Our first podcast was, I think, 4 or 5 days before the announcement. So I think that we were on to something. But now it's sort of a week later, and there's been a tremendous amount of discussion of this all over the internet. So I thought it'd be a good idea to check in and see what's happening. And we have a really wonderful article today, the Wall Street Journal, by Laura Saunders, who's a tremendous columnist for the Wall Street Journal, which I think will add some nuance to this discussion. So, what do you think? First of all, how did you feel to have the first American Pope?
Well, I think it's quite an achievement, and there's lots of talk and memes going around, and people saying, "Oh, they elected the Pope as first American so that the Vatican can avoid tariffs," and there's all crazy sorts of statements being made. But I think it's a beautiful thing, and let's see what Pope Leo is going to do for the Catholic Church and which direction he will be taking things in on his journey.
Well, that in the bigger picture is by far the more important issue. My God, he's a leader, spiritual leader of such a high percentage of humanity. That really is an amazing thing. Well, so of course, the good news is that we have the first American citizen pope, and the bad news is we have the first American citizen pope. So, this has raised issues where no pope has gone before, right?
Oh, that's right. No Pope has gone before. It's a brave new world for the Pope today.
Well, it surely is, and there's been no shortage of articles and commentary on this issue. But I think that broadly speaking, they make 3 points. First, U.S. citizens are special because of the tax and reporting regime based on citizenship. And the second, and then they go on, I think, largely and distinguish taxation, direct taxation, from the problem of reporting, right? And when we talk about reporting, I think we're generally talking about the problem of FBAR and the possibility of having to disclose contents of Vatican bank accounts, right? Have I got that right? Would you agree?
Yes, John, I think that's the most critical issue.
Let's just start there because I think that is the most critical issue. And let's just summarize, what does the FBAR requirement mean, and why is this potentially a problem for the Vatican? And would you say, by the way, that they do need good legal advice here?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, they do. And I think that because, you know, some people may believe, oh, it's the Pope. There's no way anyone's going to challenge the Pope and whether he has to report about Vatican bank accounts and so forth. You know, His Holiness is in such a position that no one would dare to say anything or send any kind of notice that, we're waiting for your FBAR. I think it's more important that people understand, first of all, what these rules require, the broad reach of these rules, and whether or not they are really justified, because the Pope is an American citizen. To my knowledge, there is absolutely no exemption for someone who happens to be in an official position such as the Pope to not have to file an FBAR. So I think that it's very critical that people understand the far reaching effects of the FBAR, really what it means. And maybe we need to rethink this thing. Maybe the US government needs to look at it again and say, maybe there's something off here. Maybe we do need to consider enacting some type of exemption when Americans are living and working abroad for many of the accounts that they're involved with that, are in their country of residence, for example. So, yeah, I think this is the perfect time to start looking at all of those issues because the Pope is such a revered individual
Yeah,
that
ab-
is
ab-
bringing it all to the fore.
yeah, absolutely. What does strike me about this is that it is, I think back to one of our first, you and I have been talking about FBAR for years, I think, right? And I think back to one of our first podcasts where we talked about the origins of FBAR in 1970. And as I look at this today, nobody could have imagined that the application of this thing could have evolved in the way that it has, where, they're talking about terrorism financing 1970, and all of a sudden we're talking about FBAR in relation to the Pope, in 2025. I mean, who could have predicted? We'll call it this sort of FBAR creep.
That's right. Absolutely. This is the perfect example of F-bar creep. I mean, it's worse than creep. It's gone berserk.
Yeah, absolutely. It provides, I think, a very legitimate opportunity to rethink the application of these rules because it's the Pope that's bringing this to the forefront and generating the publicity. But I'm presuming that you would agree with me if I were to say that the FBAR requirement is an impediment to career development for U.S. citizens living outside the United States. Would you agree?
Oh, yes, John. I've heard that from many, many people living and working abroad when F-bar became such an issue.
Yeah,
Many,
we don't want to hire an American, right?
now financial officers, chief financial officers were getting, you know, kind of demoted, were downgraded with their authority because the employers just didn't want them to have to, say, I have signature authority over whatever bank accounts for this company.
Well, remember the way that signature authority is defined goes far beyond just, filling out a bank card with your signature on it, right? I mean, the way they're defining it is the ability to control the disposition of the funds, right? And, my God, in the case of the Pope and the Catholic Church, I think it's a very tough argument, that the Pope as head of the church doesn't have the ability to control the disposition of the financial assets, right?
That's the issue. Yes, that's the very strong issue with Pope Leo. He inherits significant authority over the Vatican finances. You may remember in 2022, Pope Francis mandated that all of the Holy See's financial assets would be consolidated and run, as I remember, into this Vatican bank. And I think that significant authority carries over, of course, to Pope Leo. So,
Absolutely, and it's an example. I mean, I think it's proof positive of the ability of the Pope as essentially chief executive officer, if you will, of the Catholic Church, right? To
mhm,
to have this control. So there is no doubt that FBAR is an issue, and I think I think it's actually the biggest issue here. There's also I mean, as you pointed out before, although I don't think this factors into this hugely, I think it's worth noting that the Holy See has signed a FATCA IGA with the U.S. Treasury, right? But I don't think that's
that's right.
so much the issue here. Now, Laura Saunders, okay, great journalist, the Wall Street Journal, has an article today. Will the Pope, like other American expats, have to file U.S. taxes? Now, this article, which I would recommend to everybody, well, actually, I would recommend actually all things written by Laura to everybody. They're very well and meticulously researched. is primarily focusing on the tax aspect of this, right?
Correct. She's focusing on the whether or not the Pope needs to file a tax return, whether he's going to be, earning taxable income, it- what happens with that. And she points out that he has joined this special order of St. Augustine, and as a member of that order, they take the strictest vow of poverty, where they don't keep any assets. They don't keep income that they may earn, for example, by teaching or something. So she's her line of discussion involves Pope Leo's tax return situation and whether he would be subject to income tax. Does he need to file a tax return? And she does a very, very good job with her research and explaining about this vow of poverty and what it means. So it's a little bit different from our concern with FBAR.
Right. So I mean, that's squarely addressing the question of, does he have to file a U.S. tax return at all? Now, you said something there that I found very, very interesting, that the Augustinians take a vow of poverty, and I think the article says that, income earned by teaching or whatever is not received directly, but is assigned over to the Augustinian order or something, right?
Yes, yes,
Now,
that's correct.
now that's
And I think that might be a special rule, John, like aside from our normal tax rule, which says an individual cannot assign income to another party and think he doesn't have to pay tax on it.
right, right. Yeah, that's what I'm kind of getting at here. That the normal rules are that you cannot assign your income away. Okay, that would be the normal rule. I don't know, honestly, if there's a special rule in the case of religious organizations or not. But I think that the point we can agree on is this, that the general rule is you can't assign your income away to avoid it being treated as income for tax purposes. That would be the general rule, right?
That's correct, John. That's
So,
correct.
to the extent, okay, that this is a justification for taking the position of no taxable income, this would have to be the result of a special rule, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, just to give people an example, taking a common example that I've seen, someone earns a salary and for whatever reason, they don't want to be taxed on all of it. And so they tell their employer, and this happens a lot in foreign countries. They tell their employer, well, pay it over to my wife. She's, a housewife. She has her own bank account. Just pay it over, half of it to her, or pay over my bonus to her. And the employer may happily do it, not thinking that there were any, tax issues or nefarious intention behind this. And the individual might be thinking, well, I don't have to report it because they paid it to my wife, not to me. And my wife is, for example, a non-US person. So that's the concept of assignment of income, and it doesn't work. Income has to be reported and taxed by the person who performed the services to earn it. And you would look at that transaction as essentially two parts. The first part would be the person performs his services and earns his salary, 100% is taxable to him. And then he is taking a portion of whatever it is and giving a gift over to his spouse. And so you're implicating various tax rules there. You've got your income tax, you've got your gift tax. If the gift is being made to a non-citizen spouse, you're going to have some bigger issues there because there's no unlimited marital deduction available for gifts made to non-citizen spouses. And yeah, it gets a little bit hairy. So that's the general rule. Now, as we said, it looks like there is something very special for certain members of the clergy and so forth that they don't have to follow that assignment of income principle.
Right. What would you advise? I mean, there's been so much media coverage of this to date that I would have to think that the the church is beginning to wonder if they shouldn't get some sort of specialized advice here.
I think they will. I think they will be because I don't think the church would want to have any kind of potential scandal surrounding the Pope. And if you remember with the Vatican Bank in earlier years, there were various scandals going on. And I think the Pope, because of his control over the Vatican Bank, I think he would want everything to be clear as well. I don't think he would want to have this cloud over what he should be doing surrounding, his reign.
Oh, absolutely not. And I mean, I think that, in general, I would have to think that, like most people, the Pope would have a commitment to compliance with all laws that might apply to him.
Correct.
Um,
Absolutely.
it does seem to me, though, that as I listen to those words might apply to him, this really seems to me to be an example of pointing out the absurdity of taxing Americans abroad, right? Because here we have an American citizen living outside the United States with absolutely no assets in the United States, no sources of income in the United States, yet caught up in this brouhaha of problems, right? I mean, isn't this at the very least an opportunity to rethink the issue of citizenship taxation?
Yes, I think it's the perfect opportunity. And, maybe it's a
Mostly
very good thing
people
we have an American citizen pope for that reason that this has been brought to the fore. People are looking at it and saying, wow, if these rules could apply to the pope, what about the average Joe? Like, how is he managing this? And we know from firsthand experience the difficulties the average Joe has with maintaining an overseas bank account, for example, because the foreign banks often don't want Americans as part of their clientele because of the various reporting obligations the financial institution might be subject to. So things get complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you hear a lot of these questions get raised in the US, and the response very well, you don't like it, just renounce. What do you think? I mean, this seems to me to, if I were the US government, I think I might feel a bit embarrassed about this situation. Or do you think,
Mm, I don't know if the government feels embarrassed about it.
well, what if
I don't think
Pope
the
were to
American
renounce and
abroad has
say,
been given enough attention.
well, do you think that it would be reasonable for the Pope to consider renunciation to avoid the FBAR issue?
Huh. I know that the average person living and working abroad for many years and facing the difficulties because of the U.S. tax reporting and other obligations that arise, they have felt, many of them have felt that is the only solution. I don't know what the Pope would be feeling. I think that as an American and given his position in the world and on the world stage, he would not want to give up his citizenship. I think he holds it near and dear. He's also a citizen of Peru, I understand, because he was working in Peru for many years in his capacity, religious capacity. I don't know what his position was at that time, but he's taken on that citizenship probably for a love of the country because he was so attached to it. He was there many, many years. So I think emotionally he would not want to give up his citizenship. And let's see, what exemptions we might have or might be put into place, or I don't know.
Well, it's a very difficult problem because, I think it's hard for the United States to take the position they shouldn't enforce the law on this individual,
Hmm.
because he's the Pope, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're the Pope and it comes down to a decision of, your citizenship versus protecting the finances of the Catholic Church, from both a disclosure perspective and a possible penalty perspective, right?
Hmm.
That seems to me to be something that one would legitimately consider. Would you agree?
Yes, John, I understand, but I don't know that the Pope would want to even be considering that. How can we say? We can't say.
No, I agree. I'm just, reinforcing how these crazy U.S. rules put, people in these, these, what's that phrase? Sophie's choice, decisions, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you think of we have both heard the situation with married couples. One is US, the other is not.
Yeah. Oh, it's an unbelievable.
It causes a nightmare with their financial situation and the reporting and arguments about, gee, why does the government need to know about my stuff? I'm not even American. And, just because, your name is on it. And I mean, it goes on with discord in these types of FBAR marriages, we've called them.
Yeah. Well, so the Pope situation is just a more high profile example of a problem, right? So in a sense, at the very least, it's generating discussion that hasn't existed before. Well, okay. We'll continue this discussion, of course. It's interesting, very interesting. You're presumably going to continue writing blog posts. I think you had the first blog post out on this. I
Yes,
would
I'm
imagine.
proud to say, as far as I know, it was the first blog post out.
I think it was, and I would guess that there might be another one in you about this issue.
Let's see.
Okay. So how would people?
There's been so much written now, John, but to be honest, I haven't found the depth of analysis that I was hoping to see.
No, there is no depth of analysis. Well, Laura Saunders' article is very.
Laura's gone above and beyond, but I saw an article, for example, that said, the Pope, I think they were affirmative. The Pope should be filing a Form 8938 about the Vatican accounts.
No,
And of
no.
course not. Of course not. 8938 deals with, assets, foreign financial assets that you beneficially own. The Pope does not beneficially own any of the assets
Well,
of the
that's
Vatican.
right. That's right. And that's why I think the fact.
It's the issue, does he have control over them and signature authority that we are talking about? And I've analyzed that in my blog. But people are spouting, stuff that just it's crazy. And
Well, they
it
don't
makes
understand the difference between FATCA and FBAR. I
That's
think
right.
this is a very, very common theme. I mean, leaving aside your view of whether FATCA is a reasonable or unreasonable thing, it's not the same thing as FBAR. And I think it would help the discussion. Maybe this should be the focus of your next post. Okay. Understanding the difference between FATCA reporting and FBAR reporting, is perhaps.
Yes, that would be a wonderful idea, John. I think I'll take you up on that.
Yeah, no, I think that would be a wonderful contribution, and I think very timely contribution to the discussion. Okay, well, this has been great, and we'll continue. And to find your blog for this anticipated article about the difference between FATCA and FBAR, what the
Well,
Pope teaches us about the difference between FATCA and FBAR, where will they find that?
Okay, well, they can certainly find it when it's written, but right now the one that's up is, does Pope Leo have to file an FBAR, U.S. Citizenship and God's Bank? That is the blog post that's I have had now for, I don't know, when did I put that up?
About a week
Some
ago.
time back. I think, yeah, at least a week. May the 9th. May the 9th.
Exactly a week.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
yeah.
Time for another one then. We need the
It
sequel.
is. It's time. It's time. So they can find that at www.us-tax.org, O-R-G.
And that hyphen is the dash, the small dash, right? So as I
It's a
say,
little dash. Yes, it's not an underscore.
us-tax.org.
www.us-tax.org.
All right.
And then
Wonderful. Well, thanks for checking in again today on this important issue. And my God, I keep coming back to this. In 1970, nobody could have contemplated that Mr. Afbar would creep and evolve to the extent that he has today.
honestly, John, that's such a good point. It's
All right.
such a good point.
Till next time. Thanks, Virginia.
All right, John. Thank